Investing Insights with Right Property Group, exploring trends in real estate and helping property investors gain financial security.
G'day everyone, how you going? Episode 4, Series 3, Investing Insights with the Right Property Group. I'm here. I'm Phil Tarrant, my co-host Steve Waters, Victor Kumar, Right Property Group. Gentlemen, how you going? You well?
Going well, Phil.
Awesome. Thank you for asking.
Now, this is the first recording post the recommendations made by the Royal Commission. I don't want that to dominate today's podcast, but I think we should probably kick off with it. Lots of uncertainties still in front of us and underway. What's your read of it, Steve? What sort of conversations are you having with the Right Property crew at the moment around all this?
Look, I think there will be change, and you would have been under a rock if you hadn't heard the outcome of the Royal Commission. And essentially the banks got smacked with the fluffy end of a feather duster as punishment, really. I think the big thing that's going to affect us is how they will change the lending requirements and then the flow on to brokers, potentially being non-existent. It'll be a user pay system, and how that will affect different areas throughout Australia in investing. And at the moment, it's business as usual because nobody really knows what the outcome is and whether the recommendations are going to be taken on. Having said that, that's a pretty good chance. Either way, just with the consumer psyche, there will be an effect, and I believe it will hinder some markets and it potentially enable other markets.
Okay, so Victor, for you, you just watch your space, wait what happens, keep focus on the strategy, be aware of, but look for opportunities.
Yes, absolutely. One of the things that happens when there's change about is there's opportunities about. So we need to be mindful of what they are, but certainly maybe watch this space for a little while longer because I think cooler heads are starting to prevail in terms of what does this really mean for the mortgage industry? Are we taking competition away because of the recommendation, which is my opinion? And importantly, the Governor of the Reserve Bank actually came out immediately after the report was tabled, saying that it's in contrary to the Productivity Commission that was put in, which doesn't fly in the face of making sure there's healthy competition and handing it back straight to the Big Four. I read an article yesterday, actually it was on Twitter, where Scott Morrison...
Must be true.
Must be true, right? Scott Morrison came out and said that we need to take a measured approach to this and not just go through blindly.
Yeah, I actually watched Scott Morrison was at the National Press Club yesterday, so middle of February, and he was asked a question from the floor around mortgage brokers, and he was very supportive, very complimentary of the very important role that mortgage brokers play and the essential role they have in promoting competition outside of the major banks into the regional banks and smaller banks, and ensuring that all Australian property investors have access to the best financing possible. So, what can you do as a property investor, Victor? You've got a voice, haven't you? You can. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And equally importantly, maybe get your hands on a couple of white paper reports that are floating around. I know Momentum Intelligence has put out a report which is really a strong testimony to where the consumer sentiment is, as opposed to where the Royal Commission is in terms of its sentiments.
So there is some really good reports around, but my people tell me, Victor, my sources, and as you know, I'm pretty hooked into the property investment landscape, that you have some news for me, something around a book. What's going on?
Yes, Phil, this was a book that was in my head for 15 years, and last year I pulled the trigger to actually pen it, and it's called Supercharge Your Property Portfolio. And the news is that the Money magazine has made it the recommended book of the month for February.
Okay.
So we'll put that in the show notes and the link as to where our listeners can go to get the book. It's been very well received by the industry.
So is it about your journey through property, or is it more about your views as a property professional helping other people out, or is it a bit of both?
It is a bit of both. And it addresses all the fundamentals that most people get wrong, and certainly taking away all of the fluff and putting it down to bare basics as to what people usually get wrong when they're trying to build a multi-property portfolio.
Okay. How do I get a copy of it? Is it in bookshops and stuff?
It is in the bookshops, but we'll also put the link in the show notes, and people click on that and go to the website.
And I'm assuming, Steve, that you've read it cover to cover?
4 times I was the editor.
Oh, yeah.
I was the shadow writer. No, it's a good book.
Yeah.
It does address the fundamentals, as Vic said. And often when you do get literature around property investing, it can be overcomplicated. And Vic's done a good job in making it quite simple.
Did you enjoy the process?
It was
it a pain?
quite. No, it wasn't.
harder?
It wasn't. It was quite gratifying
Yeah.
because once you're in a flow, it's fairly easy because it's all sitting in your head. The challenge was then to put it in the right chapters in the right order so that it flows.
And is there a section on there around how to spot hotspots? Is that one of your things? I know it's, having worked with you guys for many, many years, you're a bit anti-hotspots. People are talking about hotspots. That's pretty much a not spot, right?
Absolutely. And there is definitely a section in there how to keep yourself safe from the, in inverted commas, hotspots.
Okay. Well, I don't know if that's a good hook into what I want to chat today. Is I also wanted to talk about hotspots in 2019. So is there a such thing as a hotspot? What does your chapter say in your book? Is a hotspots exist? Or is that just something made up by the media?
It's usually made up by the media. Okay. Usually when something's touted as a hotspot, it's already too late. The fundamentals have already gone out of the area and you're jumping on way too late. Or, worse still, you're speculating.
Okay. So, smart property investment, we like hotspot stories because everyone clicks on them. Everyone's looking to become a bazillionaire overnight by finding the next secret hotspot, which never really exists. And I've seen a lot of people get burned by getting carried away in trading on hotspots. If you think back to the mining booms, was it Moorumba?
Moorumba, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people got hurt up there, like really badly.
Yeah,
like,
Port Hedland as well.
Up Port Hedland, getting swept away in a lot of the noise that was in the market in general. And I think there was a number of property firms out there selling this stuff pretty hard, right? And a lot of people did well out of it if you bought and sold at the right time. But I think a lot of people were left with a lot of properties sitting there, which was, a third or a quarter of value of what it is. So people getting swept up in hotspots. But let's talk about the fundamentals of a hotspot. So I don't want this to be an anti-hotspot discussion. I think the framework of a hotspot, the dynamics of a hotspot, the DNA of a hotspot is critical to any type of property investment, right? You need to find these things. So maybe we go through that. So let's put hotspots aside, I think, and say, for the base of this chat, a hotspot is somewhere where it has all the best fundamentals for supporting yourself as a property investor. So that's capital growth and good yields, right? That's the holy grail for property investors. So for you, Steve, when you look at identifying a place, when you look at identifying somewhere which is going to give you what you want as a property investor, i.e. capital growth and yielding, where do you start? What's the first thing you do?
It's a combination. I really couldn't just pinpoint one factor, but if I broke it down into a couple, it'd be infrastructure, past and future, or now and future, in combination with supply and demand. Because what that's going to do is give us an insight into what that area will need in terms of the infrastructure, but also the population that follows, therefore creating demand. But just coming back to the hotspot phrase, if you will, we really break that down into two. One type of hotspot is something that's going to just be an artificial peak in the market and rise quite rapidly and then contract in price as well. And then you have the different type of hotspot, which has got longevity, and that's around the fundamentals.
Consistent growth.
Consistent growth. I think just the media terminology of hotspot is really good clickbait, as you'd know. But the fundamentals are always going to prove the longevity of an area, and a rising tide lifts all ships at the end of the day. So if you don't get in at the beginning of a hotspot, so to speak, it's okay if you get in there at the 7 o'clock position or the 8 o'clock position on the property clock and then ride that growth train, so to speak, up until a point where you exit the market.
So on that, obviously, if it's a hotspot and it continues to be a hotspot, if you look at it historically, a lot of the areas, the ones that were in your first example where it had a blimp, and rose rapidly and then settled back to where it should be, they didn't actually have the good fundamentals. It was possibly people chasing yields, and therefore as the yields increase, so I'm talking mining towns obviously, as the yields increase, more and more people jump in, so it creates that supply and demand balance.
And it's
right?
self-perpetuating.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, if I've done really well and I'm getting stacks of cash flow and also getting good capital growth at the same time, I'm going to spruik to everyone that will want to hear, it just creates a groundswell. But when the fundamentals get away from the area, in fact, that area usually does not have the fundamentals, and when it goes away, or the pent-up demand, particularly in the mining towns where the construction phase is finished, the demand gets sucked out, and therefore it settles back to normalcy, and that's where a lot of people get hurt. Whereas if you look at other so-called hotspots, so let's talk about Sydney, let's talk about Melbourne as an example.
Which were two big hotspots.
Very, very big hotspots. And even in there were some areas that it would not make sense to invest in the long-term view. Whereas others were, absolute no-brainers in terms of investing there. So when you look at it from that viewpoint, when you're looking at a hotspot, in inverted commas, the fundamentals need to be there, and they need to be there for the long term, which is coming back to what you said, Steve, your infrastructure going in, your population increasing, and people actually wanting to live in that area.
Well, if we break it down to what in terms of that, so there's the potential hotspot and then there's the current hotspot.
Yeah, you want to be in there before it actually becomes a hotspot.
Yeah, but once again, we're not talking about hotspots in its true sense. Yeah,
We're just talking about good buying.
good buying.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but interpreting perhaps what's a vested interest by those reporting on it versus what's fundamentally correct is another story as well. So you mentioned Moranbah and some of those mining towns that suffered horrifically. There are some articles and some media banter around it at the moment, how they've bounced back and they've increased 15% over the last 12 months. Statistically, that might be correct, but you've just lost.
Dropped significantly.
It dropped 80% or 90%. And whilst the fundamentals may not be there, the data will reflect that it's potentially a hotspot.
When you guys are, I've been out to your offices and stuff, and you've got different offices, and you sit there. Do you ever march into Victor's office and say, "I've found the new hotspot"? What sort of language do you guys use?
Every 15 minutes.
Yeah. But what sort of language do you guys use internally to determine something which is pretty good right now?
Well, first of all, we don't use the word hotspot.
No, it's
No,
never.
I've never heard you use it.
No,
So
it's not part of our vocabulary, as Vic says. But potentially, what we do is we'll have our weekly meetings around new fundamentals, all the data that's been collected and how we decipher it, and we'll then start to create a pool of potential areas, and then we just shortlist them over a period of usually around about 6 months. It does take that long, and that can be a combination of just the data, and we've spoken about it before, also ground truth, where we physically go to the areas. So we really don't start speaking about it, an area a lot, until we've physically been there and we're ready to either shoot it down or pull the trigger.
Well, let's talk about last week. So last week you were in Adelaide and I was in Brisbane.
Yeah.
And we reported back to each other as to what our eyes saw on the ground, because data can be one thing, and we do swap areas so that Steve looks at it through his eyes and his opinion, and I look at it through my eyes and my opinion, and then we compare notes, and if we are 80 or 90% in agreement in an area, then we explore it a lot more. Right, so it's important that even if you have identified an area, that you do go back and revisit it time and time again, because things change. Things change on a monthly basis.
And it's the pulse of the market, but it's also the pulse of the agents within the area. They're a really good indicator of how the market's performing. It's just their general demeanour, what they say to you, but you need to be able to ask the right questions to get the answers that are pertinent to the particular area. So if we take Adelaide as an example, where we've been buying there for probably 18 months or thereabouts.
A bit longer than that.
2 years.
Yeah.
And it's done very well for us. Hasn't broken any records. It's not been in the media, but the areas that we're in, it just continues to pour, bread and butter growth, as we call it, which is really good. But there's been a lot of media attention around it in the last probably 8 months, and rightly so. But what I've found over the last couple of trips down there is that some of the areas are getting the attention that perhaps shouldn't be, and that investors need to be wary looking forward about where they purchase, especially in Adelaide, because it doesn't have the population growth that Sydney or Melbourne will have, and it probably never will. And there's a lot of development down there. And so if we take the inner city, just like most CBD centres in each state, it's probably better to steer clear of that. Even though we like to talk about that 20-minute to 30-minute drive from around Adelaide is where we concentrate on. That doesn't mean CBD-centric, so to speak. But there's a lot of development over there. There will be an oversupply there, and I hope that doesn't come back to haunt me, but I believe it will be. But the outer suburbs are starting to probably, in some areas, overperform. And what's happening is because the prices are going up, it's affecting cash flow, which is part of the reason you go to Adelaide other than diversification and growth. Anyways, is because it's relevant, good cash flow.
Which was the basis of our debrief last week when you had that visit to Adelaide, where you really need to be careful as to what you buy there in terms of looking at it from a cash flow and potential growth point of view, because a lot of the properties where a lot of the property pundits are saying would be really good areas to buy, when you really do the numbers on it, the numbers look exactly like what it would in Melbourne and Sydney. And
even Sydney right now, that's a real, and that's an example that we had. So there was a potential development site down there, just a splitter block. So development's probably the wrong terminology. Purchase price was, I think it's $550,000 or something like that for a split 1 into 2. The yield was going to be 3.75% thereabouts. I can come to Sydney and get that. And so, and I'm not saying you should, but as an investor, what you need to think about was, so do I want to go to Adelaide now and take on the just touch under 4% yield, pay the same price as I would in Sydney, knowing that Adelaide doesn't have the population growth or the potential growth as it would in Sydney. Yes, Sydney's oversupplied, but we've got the highest rate of immigration we've ever had. It will absorb far quicker, that oversupply, than somewhere like Adelaide.
So you both visit an area and you both got your own lens of how you look at it. And I imagine there's a lot of commonality because you both see the world the same way.
We see it black and white. Yeah.
and you both experience, you've worked together a long time. So I imagine you see the same things, right? But when you go down the path of assessing a particular area, so you go visit suburb X and you go and visit suburb X and you sit down and talk about it, is that a structured conversation or you just sort of muse over, the shopping centre was crap and empty and there was for sale signs up all over
coffee
the place.
Was all ordinary. Yeah.
Coffee was ordinary. Or do you actually, when you guys get together to do a bit of a debrief or an analysis on a particular area, is it structured? You sort of go through, here's the 10 points, let's talk about this, let's talk about this, let's talk about this.
Very structured. It has to be. We need to cover off certain aspects as we go down that list. Otherwise, it's just a general conversation. And when you're dealing with potentially billions of dollars, it can't be anything but structured.
Yeah.
And it also, Vic might have a different list than I do, but there'd be some commonality amongst it. And it's just debriefing each other's notes.
And do you ever sort of get at polar opposites where you just go, no,
we haven't. I don't think.
We haven't really.
No.
Yeah. There may be that one person's more buoyant in the area than the other, but then if that's the case, we go back and revisit the area together.
Yeah.
So that I'm showing Steve what I'm seeing and Steve's showing me what he's seeing in that area, and that way you can't get it wrong.
And do you sort of ever veto the other on anything? Do you have a sort of a...
No, I haven't done that so far.
No
intention.
No intention?
Yep.
No?
Yeah.
No, unless it was just an absolute something was missed. But it's not just us. There's another crew behind us or team behind us that are analysing as well, our buyers agents and our analysts. So all the information is pulled together.
So it's really a holistic determination of which areas are going to be the most relevant and productive for your clients. It's a lot of science involved and a lot of background. You call it ground truth, right?
Yeah, but it is a holistic approach, and it's a different scenario for each client. It could be different people's household incomes and budgets and capital and what have you, and where they are in their own potential portfolio and goals will determine different areas as well.
And on the balance of things, how much, when you look at determining an investable location, let's call it a hotspot, right? But I don't want to call it a hotspot. An investable location, how much of your decision is based on the research and the numbers and the economic data that you've pulled out versus you guys getting on the ground, having a look around, speaking with agents? So essentially it's your human intelligence versus your sort of, your sort of research.
Human intelligence, I like that.
Yeah.
Have you ever had that said to you before?
No, I've just been called intelligent.
Read his book.
The data leads us to a particular area first, and then
so data gives you clues.
It's steerage, correct?
Yeah. Okay.
But you can get it wrong if you just rely on just the data and not go on the ground. You can get it horribly
And we've been
wrong.
to plenty of places where the data have perhaps indicated that it could be an area of interest, and then we've been there and we've spent months on the ground, literally, to say, you know what, no,
Don't see it.
don't see it, don't feel it, and the data is misleading.
I just had a mental picture of you. I know you're a country boy walking around one of those little Y-shaped things looking for water on the ground. Like,
do you know I can do that? True story. A water diviner.
A water diviner. There you go. Yeah.
I can do that.
Yeah?
Yep.
Does it work?
Absolutely, it does.
Yeah. Sounds like smoke and mirrors.
No, I'll prove it
Maybe
to
that's a new name for your business, the water diviner property.
you. Water's diviner.
Water diviner. We'll find the next hotspot.
There's a picture of me with a coat hanger. Into a
Do you know what's really funny though? And I'm not a country guy, so whether or not there's any mystique around that, I imagine it's some laughable thing, or people really believe that you can actually find water.
It's true.
I know, but I think a lot of people go through their property investment journey a bit like that. They sort of, they're just sort of sitting there with a couple of bits of wire or sticks in their hands trying to work out.
You're painting a really bad picture of me here.
I tried. This is called a metaphor, Steve.
Right.
Read his book. I'm sure it's full of it.
There it is. That was it.
Metaphors.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Or a simile. Something is like something. But anyway, it is an art form. It is a science. Finding investable locations.
100%.
And if you're leaning on the media, waiting for this big flashing thing that says hotspot, buy now, you're not doing it the right way. That's a fair. And that's a base assumption, which is.
So I still got the
accurate.
smile on my face.
Yeah,
I'm struggling taking it seriously.
Though,
it was good, yeah.
The idea of a podcast is supposed to tell stories, right? So people right now are imagining you walking around
With a straw hat.
with your Blundstones on and your Cobra and your dryzer bone, trying to look like a country guy.
No one does that, mate. No one does that. Board shorts, thongs, and stubbies.
Yeah, that's the way forward. So it is a science. It is an absolute science.
I believe it's a lot of it. It is a science, but then there comes a time where you can either be a paper trader, or you can pull the trigger and be in it, and you will never learn as much as then when you've got vested dollars.
And you obviously do this for other people. Your business is providing this as a solution to help people ensure they're buying the right properties for their needs. But if you don't use guys like you or use a buyer's agent, you can do it yourself. You probably see it all the time. You probably happen with me where you flick a switch and you actually turn into a property investor, where you go from being a database person to someone who can look at a suburb, travel a suburb, and appreciate those things. It's a big step.
Big step.
Not everyone makes that step.
Not everybody does, and it's down to their personality. I was probably one of those people when I first started. I was I've told the story 100 times. I was the procrastinator from hell, because everything for me is about numbers. It's my background. If I hadn't have had the support of my then girlfriend, now wife, I probably wouldn't have done it. That's to be totally fair.
So what was the thing that sort of shifted your perception then from being?
Look, at first it was the numbers, because I couldn't make them fall over on what my wife had already accumulated. I think at the time she had 5 or 6 properties or something like that. So she'd done very, very well. And the final trigger pull or point for me was that she did it for me.
Okay.
If it was purely up to me, I don't know if I'd have still been searching for the best deal. So I said, okay, go out and find it for me. And she did within 2 days, and I went to water.
There you go. And I imagine you talk about this in your book, Victor, so another segue. But
Yeah,
anyway,
absolutely.
Was there a point?
It's not planned either, right?
was there a point for you where you went from being data, reading everything to actually I need to get on the ground and drive around and start talking to people?
Look, taking a segue from my medical training, so doing ultrasound, you can have all the theory you want, but unless you're physically doing the ultrasound, you can't recognize the patterns and the variants and to know which is normal and what is not. And we transpose that to property. You can, back when I started, the data we would get was at the back of, property magazines.
Very rudimentary, yeah.
And which was, you are sort of hanging on for the next month's episode to see whether, you're right or wrong, or whether your area is gone up in that quota or not, then translating that back into the area. And back then, flights were a lot more expensive. So a lot of people were investing within their suburbs or within driving distance. But now things have changed, right? So your information is readily available, perhaps a bit too readily available as well. Which is
point. Yeah.
Which is what where people go wrong, is where they get too much information and they don't know which way to turn. So you need to be able to decipher that when you're on the ground to say, okay, this is all just fluff, and these are the brass tacks to this area, and this is why it'll work.
It's almost like distorted truth.
Absolutely.
It's all true, but you just don't know which direction to go, and that's a little bit more true than perhaps that data. And when I say distorted, it's because it could be something as simple as old properties versus a new house and land release package, or off the plans that are pulling it up, or whatever it may be. And without the truth behind that, and if you make your decisions purely on data, well, that's a dangerous game.
You can't do this in a weekend. You need to spend real time on the ground. In what you and I do, we probably spend 2-3 months in an area before we call it.
That's on the ground. What about the data beforehand?
That's right.
Yeah.
So uncovering the truth is the secret to a inverted commas hotspot. Right? Data helps. It gives you clues that can lead you in a particular area, but then you need to actually get there and look at it yourself. Tell me, Victor, when you are looking at a spot and you're visiting a new area where you might not have been beforehand, but the data has led you there. A very good way to uncover the truth is to talk to people.
Absolutely.
Or from that live there, operate there, work there, have businesses there. That's how you can really get the ground truth. Now, real estate agents and property managers are a critical part of that. If you're looking to invest in a particular area, you need to be connected in with those people.
Yep.
Would you just wander a high street and walk into a Central 21 or a Star Partners and say, "Oh, hi, can I speak to the principal?" Or would you call up beforehand and book an appointment, or like, I want to have a look at this because this is important? How would you approach that?
My preference is to simply rock up, right? And the reason why I do that is then you don't, you're not going through a sales process with them, where they're starting to flick off properties to you beforehand and all this sort of stuff. So the relationship built with that agent then becomes a lot more organic and more in line with what I want. The best agents or the best opportunities come when you're window shopping and the agent pops out of the office and comes out and talks to you, which means that they are either hungry for business or they're just simply good operators, and they will then give you leads. Yeah.
Okay. So a tip then: linger out the front.
Yeah, absolutely.
Look at the shop window.
Loiter.
I use the word linger. Okay. So if they come out, that's a good thing.
That's a good thing. Okay. That's a good thing.
So say you start and I'm thinking about, I don't know if he listens to this. I was up at Old Bar. I go a surf trip up there sort of every winter, and I was looking at some waterfront land up there, and the guy came out. Engaged me in conversation, took me for a coffee, and I thought it was very good. I can't remember his name. It's good operator. But then I sat with him and we just started talking, right? So if you actually engage a real estate agent or a property manager, what are the 3 key bits of information you need to get out of them to help you down this journey of determining whether or not the area is a hotspot or an investment location?
Well, the first thing that you need to get out of them is, who are their buyers? Are they home upgraders? Are they first home buyers? Are they investors? And if they're investors, are they local investors or are they interstate investors? Has there been a change in terms of the inquiries that he's had over the last couple of months? And then, quiz him on what's happening in the area. A good agent will have all of the points already in their head in terms of what's happening, in terms of development, what changes have happened. And sometimes the agent may have a negative view of the area because of local stigma, and because he's always grown up there, or he's come from an area that is a lot more upmarket and not within his expectations, so to speak, and making sure that you're then realigning that back to what you see as factual. And these are just some of the baseline questions I would ask.
Because there's about 400 questions.
There's a question for you then, Steve, running on the same theme. So you'll get your own suite of questions that you want to start asking people. When you first meet an agent, the first time, and they've come out and said, "G'day, what are you looking at?" Right? You're thinking about your move sort of 4, 5, 6 steps down the path where you might be transacting in a property. What sort of persona do you like to create with the agent? And I imagine it probably change depending on what they're like and how they approach you. What do you want them to think about you? Do you want them to think initially that you're just looking around and bit naive, or are you in there pretty hard and disclosing that this is what you do for a living, and you're painting a picture that you're a hard negotiator from the get-go? How do you approach that?
No, the latter point you made, that's just about ego, and that won't help you anywhere. For me, they can interpret who I am whichever way they want, and I prefer it that way, because they will
So you don't really disclose.
I don't disclose who I am until later on.
Yeah,
When I say who I am, I mean what I do.
Yeah, but what you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what your
what
intent
I'm there
is.
for.
Yeah.
I probably always do disclose though that I want to invest. I don't want to give any indication that I'm an owner occupier looking for a place to live. But it's not just the one agent for me. So if I'm talking to, or if I've done my recon beforehand, the agent I'm looking for is probably the best listing agent in the office who does the most business.
Okay. So you'll know who you want to talk to.
Yeah, and I'll angle for that person, and then I'll work my way up to the principal, because at the end of the day, the principal has
got the vested interest,
and he's got the vested interest. But I also speak to the property manager, because what I'm trying to do is combine into that pot of ground truth, I suppose, what the momentum of the market is, so from the sales agent or from the principal. And then when I'm going to the rental department, I'm wanting to look at the vacancy rate, how many properties they manage, what's the buoyancy of the rental market, has it contracted, is it going up, what type of properties do better than others, how many bedrooms, bathrooms, so on and so forth. And that's really helping me determine, and that's just not with one agent either, that would be the whole strip of agents. And then what usually happens is you'll get brushed by some of the agents because it's just all too hard. And then you'll get others that are very, very hungry, and they're willing to give you the time to sit down and basically not open up their books, but open up their book of experience and give you the time of day to let you know what's happening in the area. Because agents, they're a good bunch of people. Yes, there was some pretty ordinary ones amongst them, but at the end of the day, they want to make a living, and they make a living by selling property. So it's in their interest. And that's at that point that I'm a little bit upfront saying, look, this is what I do. And I am, depending on the market pulse, but I'm going to give you a lot of offers, and a lot of them aren't going to be too attractive, but we complete.
How do you know when, say Victor, it's a scenario, you walk a high street in a suburb, and there might be 3 or 4 different real estate agents. There's some branded ones like an LJ Hooker, some of them independent, right? Say you've gone and visited all of them. How do you know when you really smelt out a bargain, or someone is really desperate to sell? Say you've reviewed a whole bunch of things, you go, that person there, I can get this thing cheap.
Are you talking about the vendor or the agent?
Both. From the agent. A good agent probably won't give too much away.
No, because the agent works for the seller.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, but you've done this enough now to go, I can smell that property right there. There's something going on there. This thing's going to get shifted, and I reckon get it really cheap. Or is that just a gut instinct
It's a gut instinct, plus it's also talking to the listing agent. And Steve mentioned it recently in terms of always talk to the listing agent, because they control the commentary back to the vendor. They're the person that has the vendor's ear. So,
do you want to explain that though, from a remuneration?
Yeah, sure. So generally how an agent gets paid, so how a real estate agency works is, let's say the commission on a property was, say, $10,000, right? 20% of that actually goes back. So $2,000 goes back to the office, regardless of who sells it. And then the commission, depending on how the agency runs, 40% of it goes back to the listing agent, and the other 40% goes back to the person that sold it. So if you're dealing with the listing agent and he's also selling the property to you, he gets 80% of the commission. Okay. Right? Now different splits with different agencies, but that's how generally works. Yeah. So if you're dealing with someone that's going to get 80% of the commission, they're more likely to be in the vendor's ear and making sure that your message is translated back to the vendor straight away, as opposed to if you're dealing with the salesperson in the office, the salesperson then needs to go back to the listing agent, and he then translates your request and offers back to the vendor. So there's a lot of slippage there, plus the fact that there isn't that motivation of, hang on, I can get 80%.
And human nature kicks in.
Human nature.
Is the listing agent the more senior person?
Not necessarily.
In the transaction?
Not necessarily.
No. So the listing agent is the person who went out
and won the listing, which is half of the game, right?
Yeah, and they usually say a good listing agent is probably the best agent in the office, because it's hard to get someone to commit to you to sell their property. And the sales agent could be just about anybody, so to speak. But it's really important that the listing, that you, as Vic says, that you go to the listing agent, because human nature can kick in. And depending on how the office runs, which is another point, if you're going to be a serious investor, you need to understand how each and every office runs.
That's one of the questions we ask.
Yeah. Is it what you actually say? Are you the listing agent or are you the sales agent? You'll ask.
We ask who's the listing agent on this property.
Is there any particular time from the mechanics of getting a deal done and how real estate agents, the nature of their employment and the way they get paid, is there any better day to buy real estate than others? Like, because I always said, if you're going to buy a car, buy it on the last day of the month because everyone's trying to hit
every day is a good day.
Every day is a good day.
Look, I think when the market will dictate that, and as they get closer to the end of the month with their KPIs and what have you, but I think knowing when to speak to them, when to contact them is also important, because most real estate agents will have what they have a van day, where all the agents in the office get together in a couple of cars and they go and look at every property they have for sale within the office. So you won't get them.
Okay.
It's because they're doing the van. But a good time to get them is straight afterwards, because they've just been through every property.
You know, and that's where the vendor's motivations disclose to them and circumstances change.
May have changed. So keeping constant communication with the agent. So realistically, it comes down to the relationship you have with the agents, and a lot of hard work is put in to create the relationship, but equally to keep it.
So this goes back to the mantra around the data. The research will give you the clues of which areas to invest in, but you've got to get on the ground.
Absolutely.
And if you do this yourself, the way I view it is that you're competing with people that do this professionally for a living, which is like you guys, right? You know?
That's right. Yeah, our advantage is we do this on a full-time basis, and when we're dealing with agents, they get to know really quickly that we're not just a one sale to them. Yeah. We're multiple sales, because we've got quite a few clients that are ready to buy in that area, where we've set up the plan for them to buy in that area because it suits their portfolio. So if it comes back to, let's say it is the same price, that's been brokered between us and someone from the general public, that's done really well. Generally, the agent will lean towards us because they see longevity in that relationship, whereas that is just the one transaction.
This is when you start getting your off-market listings.
That's true.
I'll just give you a call saying, hey, look, I know you're interested. I know there's stuff you're looking at.
Yeah.
This just come on the market.
That's I'm glad you actually brought that up, because that gets bandied around too much. Off-market. And people need to understand that the true meaning of off-market. When industry people are talking about off-market, they're really referring to pre-market, and there's a big difference. So off-market is literally
non-advertised.
It was never going to be for sale, but you've managed to talk the seller into perhaps.
So you knock on the door and say, hey, look, I've just bought next door. You want me to sell me yours?
Correct.
Okay, off-market.
Yeah. Pre-market is when you've been given the heads up and you're doing it before it hits to the general public. And there's a big difference, but people tend to want to use this word off-market.
That's a good clarification.
Truly, it doesn't exist very much at all.
Yeah. If you're buying off market, generally you're paying a premium.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's the only reason that someone that wasn't intending to sell will sell, is if they've got way above what their expectation.
Upside benefit of some sort, whether it's long terms or some other thing.
So a good example of off market is we recently got a property for one of our clients, which was a potential development site. Well, it is a development site for the future, and for 6 months we've been door knocking the next door neighbours, and they've finally agree to it. That is no agent, no. That's purely off market.
Okay, good. I think we've done all right there. So hotspots, not spots, somewhat spots. Just find out. It's a mixture of good research and ground truth.
Stick to the fundamentals.
Yeah, stick to the fundamentals. Keep your relationships fluid and well oiled, and be ethical. Is what I would suggest. If you want to do it yourself, there is plenty of scope for people to be able to do it themselves. It's just, do they have the time?
Good. Nice one. All right, I think we've done pretty well there, guys. So, as you know, we're going to conclude with our question of the month, and it's from Bronwyn. Victor, I'm going to fire this as you, because you are the master at this sort of stuff. You've been doing it for years and years and years. Bronwyn asks, and it's a short question, but Bronwyn asks, how do you effectively buy at auction in a softening real estate market? She's referring to Sydney in particular. Should you avoid auctions, I guess, in Sydney at the moment, or is this is when you're going to start getting your bargains?
No, this is when you do start getting your bargains. And the reality is that with auctions, the first thing that you need to be mindful of is how many people are actually there as a genuine bidder. In other words, how many people have requested a contract, how many people have done a pest and building prior to the auction. And making sure that you've got that squared off first. And in a softening market, auctions are a really good way to buy. The trick is not to get carried away with the emotion of it, and making sure that you're setting a hard limit and sticking to it, even if it means that the property goes $1,000 above your limit. A limit's a limit.
Okay. And Steve, showing up sometimes just gets you the best bargains, right?
It's been it's happened before, apparently.
Yeah.
Look, I think just furthermore from what Vic said, you need to have a pre-approval or a loan approval in your hand. Never go to an auction without that. But because we do so many auctions, we have our different ways of doing it, and that also comes down to research, all the way down to who's the auctioneer, how do they operate, who's the agent, how do they talk, how many pests and buildings have been carried out on the property, because that will indicate people that are genuinely invested or want to go to the auction because they've spent money. How many people register is another big thing. Who's the vendor? Is it a family? Is it a distress sale? Is it a bank? And you mentioned a softening market in Sydney, and potentially there might be some bank auctions. Knowing who the bank is or who the distributor of the mortgagee is will affect on what the fallback position. So there's actually a science to that as well. It's just not a matter of, well, I want to bid on 1 Smith Street, I'm going to lob up and put my hand in the air. So if you are going to auction, know that it's an emotional play as well. You'll be worked pretty hard by the agent and the auctioneer because it's all about momentum.
And the words they use is, you don't want to lose this for $1,000.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a psychological
Stay
scenario.
firm, stay the course. And much like our conversation today around identifying investable locations, it all comes down to the intelligence you've got. Know what's happening. The more information you've got, the more informed decision you can make.
Better educated you are, the better the chance you have of succeeding.
Nice one. All right, I'm going to wind up there. Victor, 2 things. Your book, it's in bookstores.
It is in bookstores.
Check it out. What's it called again?
Supercharge your property portfolio.
Okay, nice one. And if anyone's got any questions about what we've spoken about today, or even questions about your book, no doubt, how can they get in contact?
Questions at rightpropertygroup.com.au. And if you are wanting the book, click on the link in the show notes and it'll take you to the website.
Too easy. Thank you, Victor. Steve, thanks, mate. That was all very enjoyable.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, I actually learned a little bit more about this difference between listing agents and sales agents. So that's good intelligence to know. So thank you for that information. Hope you enjoyed that, guys. We'll be back again next month for Investing Insights with Right Property Group. See you then. Bye-bye.
The information featured in this podcast is general in nature, does not take into consideration your financial situation or individual needs, and should not be relied upon. Before making any investment, insurance, tax, property, or financial planning decision, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you.